This model of a Liebherr LB28 drilling rig comes in the colours of Soletanche Bachy, which is part of the French Vinci group. It comes in a standard Liebherr branded box, and the parts are contained in both parts of the polystyrene trays. The top tray contains a short length of drill casing, and under the lid is a set of instructions and a plastic base plate to stand the model on. Although the instructions cover the model, there's no information about the real Liebherr drilling machine, and there's no information about the Soletanche Bachy group either. The bottom tray contains the main parts of the model, and these include the Kelly bar with the auger attached. There are a couple of small tools which are used to operate the model, and there's also a bag of smaller parts. There is also a small plastic adapter which is used for driving the casing, and we'll see that later. The LB28 itself is largely fully assembled, and that accounts for the large size of the box that it comes in. The large instruction sheet that's supplied with the model is pretty good. There are clear diagrams and the text is in both English and in German. It covers the assembly of the model very well, but it doesn't describe all of the features. For example, how to operate the two working winches isn't covered by the instructions, but that's easy enough to work out, and we'll see that demonstrated later in the video. There's a little bit of packaging to remove from the model, including these elastic bands that are on the tracks, and you need to be a little bit careful here because the tracks are only hooked together rather than pinned, so if they do come off the frames they separate very easily. The small bag of parts is good because it does include spares of lots of the smaller parts on the model, and that's really good for a collector because if you do happen to lose any, then you're not left with an incomplete model. The parts include spare track links and some pins, and also some floodlights and a spare windscreen wiper for the cab. One small part that does have to be fitted is a small floodlight on the innermost top of the cab, and the reason that has to be fitted is because it's easily knocked out if you raise or lower the leader. So it's a separate part, and it just pushes into place quite easily. But you do need to remember if you lower or raise the leader that it might easily be popped out, so you need to be a bit careful. The larger part that needs fixing is the Kelly bar and the rotary drive, and that just hangs onto the sledge that runs up and down the leader. It hooks over at the top, and then using small screws, one on each side, you screw the rotary drive into the sledge, and then that secures it. The screws also have a second purpose, which is when they are tightened up, they fix the sledge to any position you want on the leader. The reason this is done is because the sledge isn't actually fixed to the crowd ropes on the leader, because that part of the model doesn't function, so you have to secure it with the screws. With the Kelly bar mounted, you can fix the winch rope to the end of the Kelly bar, and you just run that up and over the top of the leader and then down to the Kelly bar, where it's a simple matter just to pass it through the top of the Kelly bar and then tie it off in a knot. At least this type of model is much easier to reeve than some crane models, and when you've got it all tied up you just make it a little bit neat by snipping off the loose end. And that only leaves one more thing to do, which is to fit a couple of hydraulic lines from the rotary drive to the sledge. And I'm using a pair of tweezers for this because you need to apply a little bit of pressure to get the end of the hydraulic lines to push into their holder on the sledge. It's not a very tight fit, so don't be too surprised if they spring out as you move the model about or try to operate it. Looking at the undercarriage first, the metal tracks are good and there's plenty of detail on the track frames. The cab detail is also good, with realistic looking windows and a mirror, and there's a nice metal ladder and bodywork detailing. At the rear there's a floodlight, and the Soletanche Bachy name is really sharply rendered by the graphics. One particularly good part of the detailing is the massive hydraulic lines on the model, which really give it an authentic and busy look. The top of the body has textured walkway surfacing, and the roof of the cab has a debris guard with floodlights and an aerial. The bottom of the leader looks great, with all the winches modelled really well and looking quite realistic. And the authentic detailing is also matched on the rotary drive and on the protective truss that looks after all of the hydraulic cabling. The top of the leader has really nice metal pulleys, and although the metal hook on the auxiliary winch looks realistic, the compromise is that it's a little bit too light to provide much tension on the rope. The metal auger looks great and is very convincing, but the only downside is that it's permanently connected to the Kelly bar, so you can't remove it. As usual, we'll start with the rolling test, and the tracks were a little bit too stiff to really roll on a smooth surface, and in fact even on the rough surface they were a little bit reluctant to roll on the review model. This seems to be more of an issue of stiffness on the review model, because a previous version of this model in Liebherr colours certainly had better rolling tracks than this one. The track frames are spring-loaded, so if you really wanted to take the tracks off you can. As you can see, the rotation of the body on the undercarriage is very smooth, and there is another feature on the tracks, which is that they are extendable. So if you view them end on, as shown here, they are closed up for transport, but on site you would widen them out to give a wider footprint when piling, and then if you want to carry it on a low loader you can narrow up the tracks and then reduce the width for transport. Another neat feature is that the top of the leader can be unpinned and then folded down to reduce the headroom for transport. But the only word of warning here is that the pins are very small, so if you do drop them on the floor you could be in for a lengthy session on your hands and knees as you try to find it. In fact, on the review model, the connection at the leader top was very stiff, so you don't really need to pin it anyway. At the bottom of the leader there is an adjustable foot, and that just screws in or out and gives you a little bit of extra level control on the position of the leader. One feature that works particularly well is the ability to raise the leader from a transport position up into a piling position. The linkage is quite complicated and the cylinders are quite stiff, but with a little bit of effort you can raise the leader up and position it just like the real machine would. And all in all it works pretty well, and you could even have the leader inclined a bit if you wanted to try piling at a slight angle. After you've had fun drilling your hole, you can then lower the leader, and it's just a matter of gently pulling it horizontal. Now, as with any model like this, you need to be a little bit watchful as you close it up. It requires some effort, but you should never be in a position of really having to force the model, and if you are forcing it, you're liable to be breaking it, so just be careful, because if it's not closing too easily then it's probably catching somewhere. And on this model, don't forget the delicate floodlight on the cab roof. To operate the auxiliary winch, you just use the supplied tool and push in on the end of the winch to release the brake, and then you just need to wind it. It's best to hold the auxiliary hook to apply a bit of tension, and you can just unwind it as you like. The winch on the Kelly bar operates in just the same way. You use the tool to push it in and release the brake, and then you can wind it up and down and position it where you want it, and when you've got the right position you just release the tool and the brake engages. If you like screwing your auger, then it just freely rotates on the rotary drive. Another unusual feature of the model is that it comes with a plastic display base which has a textured surface to represent rough ground. It's the same base supplied with NZG's Liebherr LRB 255 model, and it includes removable circular sections to form the pile location. You can insert the short length of casing that's supplied with the model, and it's best to push that through from the underside because it is a tight fit. Once it goes through the base it pushes easily, so you can then set it up so that it's properly vertical. And then you can insert the little plastic adapter piece that's provided, and that just pops in the top. You can now drop the model onto the base, and if you put the casing driver down a bit then it locks into the top of the adapter piece, and now you simulate the rig driving the casing. This is a very good example of a drilling machine by NZG, and it looks really good in Soletanche Bachy colours. The detailing is good and high quality, and the functionality provides plenty of interest too. It's certainly an easy model to highly recommend.